Hello, my name is Boe Sanderson. This is my AP research presentation. Resisting high blood sugar, how different starches affect blood sugar and cognitive function. Diabetes is a cardiovascular disease that is characterized by hyperglycemia and insulin resistance and is becoming increasingly prevalent throughout the world. In America, 37 million people have diabetes. That's around 1 in every 10 Americans. In 2015 to 2018, the CDC reported that 89.8% of adults with diabetes-related complications were either overweight or had obesity. The World Health Organization reported that in 2019, 1.5 million deaths were due to diabetes. This is a map released by the CDC in 2004 that relates percentage of diabetes to percentage of obesity in America by county. The key shows that any overlap between these is shown in shades of purple, and as you can see, a large majority of the map is either in white or paler shades of blue or red, showing that diabetes and obesity are not at a very high percentage at this time. This is the same map in 2019. We can now see a much larger portion of purple on the map, showing that in just 15 years, diabetes and obesity have increased together significantly. This shows just how suddenly these are growing and why it is more important than ever to take care and monitor our health. Diabetes can generally be defined as one of two types. Type 1 diabetes causes your body to stop making insulin and it must be taken exogenously. In type 2 diabetes, your body cannot use the insulin it makes effectively. Diabetes is characterized by hyperglycemia or high blood glucose. Because of the ineffectiveness of insulin, blood sugar can spike or drop rapidly, which can have negative effects even on those without diabetes. In individuals with diabetes, cognitive function has been a concern. In reviewing the literature, I've found that over a long period of time, diabetes is associated with a decline in cognitive function. In a paper published by Maras in 2021, they took children with type 1 diabetes and measured IQ and total brain matter. They compared this data against a group of healthy age-matched children and found that in the diabetes group, the children had a lower overall IQ. Over a long period of time, the total amount of brain matter in the diabetes group showed to lessen as the children got older. In a similar study by Nguyen's in 2005, they showed cognitive decline in middle-aged individuals with type 2 diabetes. In this study, cognitive function was measured through 4 tests to measure global cognitive function. This was a cohort study, and in the follow-ups showed that cognitive function as a whole declined over time. I also reviewed research on resistant starches. The paper published by Higgins in 2004 reviewed properties of resistant starches and their uses. This paper provided evidence for the case that resistant starches decrease postprandial glucose and for the case that it had no effect on postprandial glucose. This study also addressed other effects of resistant starches like satiety, cholesterol control, and weight maintenance. My study will aim to assess the effects of resistant starches on blood sugar and how that will affect cognitive function. In another study done by Robertson in 2005, they assessed the effects of resistant starch on insulin sensitivity. In this study, they randomly assigned people to incorporate a diet of resistant starches and another diet without resistant starch. These diets were followed for a 4-week period. The aim of the study was to assess the longer-term metabolic adaptation of the resistant starch. My method will be derived from this study, but on a smaller scale to see the immediate effects of the starch. This brings me to my research question. How can the use of resistant starches to prevent hyperglycemia affect the cognitive test scores of adults aged 31 to 60? To clarify some definitions, resistant starch is a starch that resists digestion in the small intestine and ferments in the large intestine. Hyperglycemia is just high blood glucose. My hypothesis is that the resistant starch will not raise blood glucose and therefore will produce higher cognitive test scores. To answer this question, I'll be using an experimental method, and my study design will be similar to the design in the Robertson study, but on a smaller scale as I'm looking at the immediate effects of the starch. I conducted 3 trials to collect my data: a control trial, a regular starch trial, and a resistant starch trial. For the control trial, I requested that participants came in fasted in the morning so I could collect their fasting blood glucose. Participants were then given a form of the SAGE test, which is a cognitive impairment test from Ohio State University. For the variable trials, I still asked that participants came in the morning fasted to collect their fasting blood glucose for that day. I then gave participants a regular banana for the regular starch trial and a green banana for the resistant starch trial. After 30 minutes, I took a secondary blood glucose sample, and participants were then given a different form of the SAGE test for each trial. For my participants, I used 9 healthy adults from the Fairview High School staff who all had no history of diabetes. Throughout the study, there was an outlier that popped up, which I will address as participant A, but I will discuss that more in a minute. Here I have included pictures of a form of the SAGE test I use, SAGE standing for Self-Administered Gyrocognitive Examination. The test it's a short 12-question test to assess cognitive impairment, and questions range from identification to math questions to just basic memory questions, and participants can earn a different number of points based on how well they follow the directions of the question. For a frame of reference, a fasting blood glucose level of around 70 to 100 is normal. Any higher for a sustained period of time, and it can get to be dangerous. For the control trial, the participants had around a normal fasting blood glucose level with an average of 102.6. For the test scores of the control trial, participants scored relatively high on this one, and this was actually the highest scoring test throughout the entire study. Participant A, which I mentioned earlier, came into both the regular starch trial and the resistant starch trial with higher than normal blood glucose levels. I kept in touch with this participant, and they informed me that they were diagnosed with reactive hypoglycemia, which is when after a meal and your blood glucose rises, it then drops back down rapidly. From the data, we can see that the starch had the expected effect of raising blood glucose, this is all accounting for the outlier, taking the fasting blood glucose from 98.5 to their postprandial blood glucose of 107.8. Instead of participant A's blood glucose dropping rapidly, I believe the starch only hindered the effect of the drop. In the resistant starch trial, the average, again accounting for the outlier, went from 94.9 fasting to 102.3 postprandial. The resistant starch raised the blood glucose more than I expected, but it raised it back to the average of what it was during the control trial. Participant A had a severely high blood glucose in this study, but after eating the resistant starch went back down to normal. While I would like to believe this is the work of the resistant starch, I believe the starch only hindered a more severe drop. The test scores were similar for both trials. Ohio State defines normal cognitive function on the SAGE test as a score of 17 to 22. Only 2 tests throughout the entire study scored below this, and that was during the regular starch trial, which shows to some extent that regular starches can decline cognitive function. Regarding the limitations of my research, I've identified several. One is the number and type of participants I used. I had 9 participants, which is a good amount, but with a larger sample size, the data could be better represented. All my participants were also all healthy non-diabetics, meaning that they had, for the most part, a normal blood glucose and normal cognitive function. Another limitation was the cognitive testing I used. The SAGE test is a short form test that takes around 15 minutes to complete, but a more thorough test, as in the Nugent's cohort study mentioned earlier, to assess global cognitive function would be better. Amount of starch was a confounding variable, as I did not relate amount of starch to a participant's BMI. Each participant was given the same amount of starch for both trials. Finally, I believe my biggest limitation was where my resistant starch came from. While green banana is high in resistant starch, it is not the best medium to receive it in. Participants said it was difficult to consume, and it was described as dry and chalky. To conclude, in my study, my hypothesis was proven incorrect. Resistant starch did not improve cognitive function as I thought. There is some evidence to show that the regular starch can decline cognitive function. I believe it should be taken into account that participants scored highest on the control trial test, and that test was taken fasted with no starch given prior. Future studies in this area should look at how resistant starch would affect the blood glucose of diabetics, especially in a larger sample size. A study of this method, but done with a full meal consisting of all 3 macronutrients and then adding in the resistant starch, I believe is grounds for further study. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to start with your oral defense determine which results generated by your research method were most important in informing your new understanding?
So I believe the test scores were the most important aspect of my data to inform my new understanding, because, as I said, my hypothesis was that the resistant starch would improve test scores, and we can see that's not the case, but there is evidence to show that the regular starch did decline cognitive function.
How does your new understanding address the gap in the scholarly conversation?
So when I was researching, most of the studies I found were to assess the cognitive function over a long period of time, and my study addresses the cognitive function over a short period of time and the immediate effects of the starch on cognitive function. So that's how it addresses the gap.
Hello. If you could revisit your research process, what would you do differently and why?
Well, two things I would do differently. I would try to find a better test to assess cognitive function, because the SAGE test is a cognitive impairment test, so it will show like high scores if someone has normal cognitive function, but there's no room for improvement above that. And secondly, I would also use a different resistant starch for my trial, because I believe that was a big limitation for the participants to consume and to affect the data.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Bo. Because we've got plenty of time, the floor is now open for general questions.
Yes.
I have a quick question. In your beginning part, you were talking about patients with diabetes and things, and how that was leading to a decrease in brain matter. Did you find anything on why the decrease in brain matter was happening?
No, they measured, they found it using MRIs, so they just showed that they compared it with children, and this was like a longitudinal study, so they like reassessed every 5 years, so they just kept measuring, and I don't know why, but it just showed in the diabetes group that, I don't know how significant, but it did show significant enough to say that it decreased over time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Did you have fun torturing
Well played.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
Why was this particular path of research interesting to you? Like, why did you choose this path?
Well,
Go ahead.
okay. I just think for some reason nutrition is really important to me, and I just think that this is just I don't really have any words, so it just.
I do have a question, which it's okay if you don't know this.
Yep.
The other one came from 2004?
Yes.
Do you know were there always, when diabetes was given an identity, was there always type 1 and type 2, or did type 2 become?
So I think type 2 is more correlated to lifestyle of people, and type 1 is a genetic thing. So I just think over time they just identified it, and it just became a big problem.
But in 2004, it was doctors were using the terminology type 2 diabetes.
I think so, yes.
And then my final question is, what did you learn about yourself from this whole process of research?
Oh.
As far as how you work and what, things like that.
I think, I don't know. I think there were definitely times where I procrastinated a lot, but I could still get stuff done. So, I mean, probably not a good idea, but I think it shows that if I just sit down and do the thing, then I can just get it done. I don't have to wait.
I'm going to chime in here really quick, just kind of piggyback. So the first day that Bo did the trial, and just walking in, of course, I've spent all year with Bo and sort of know who he is, and he tends to be sort of a meticulous, right, just kind of like an organized guy, or at least that's who I see. But to see him, and he was all set up, had all of the materials, all the needles, the little receptacle to throw the things away, the blood glucose meter, everything, and it was like seeing a glimpse into his future. And just looking at that, and I don't even know if that's what your future is gonna entail, but it was really, really great to see you in that moment, because you were very invested in what it was that you were doing. And I do think that it was planned ahead of time, that you were trying to torture us with the this. But that was okay. I mean, I think that was devised.
No.
I have a couple questions. First one, is there any history in your own family of diabetes?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. And second one, it's just, in any of your research, when you were looking at the ties between obesity and diabetes, did anything come up about the prevalence of fast food availability and the prevalence of families who are, they don't have the time much anymore to make dinner and sit down together, and it's more of a fast, let's grab this, let's grab that. Any ties to?
That didn't come up in my research, but like, as I said, type 2 diabetes is very lifestyle oriented, and so I just think that's a big part about it, is that like families who, I think you have to prioritize it if it becomes a problem, and then a lot of times you just can't when there's other stuff going on.
I was just fascinated by the two maps.
Yeah.
That was key to your presentation.
Interesting to see 2020, like
Oh, yeah.
post-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
How we will.
Truly, that was a wow, like, that was a jaw dropper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The two maps, yeah. That
Yeah.
was-
What was your reaction to that, Bo?
yeah.
I was saying, I was like, because it had the
You're like took a step over.
Literally, jaw drop.
this is from the CDC, and it's like it has like 2004, 2009, and like 2014 maybe to 2019, and then just seeing like the difference between 2004 and 2019, it's just
Do you happen to find
Crazy.
any, like, I'm just curious about, like, it's obviously a health crisis. I mean, we are obviously in this throes of a health crisis. Any news on that? Like, is anybody, like, where are we at? Are we banning fast food anywhere?
I think
I mean,
I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I'm just curious.
It's
You
a
find anything?
it's a really like complex idea, because there's been like trends recently of like I'm not gonna get anything, but like the body positivity, and people are like, yeah, it's
Right.
okay, and then not saying that it's bad, but obviously it's not that like people don't look okay, it's that it's your health that's the
Right.
problem.
Well,
Yeah.
we were talking about too, like IQ scores are dropping, like there's just like data on
Yeah.
every point that we're just killing ourselves, and
Wasn't there somewhere that tried to like reduce like soft drinks and stuff? Right? That didn't go over well?
I don't know, I read an article just recently that when they put a tax on soft drinks. that The sales dropped dramatically, but I don't know. if that
over
was,
time,
Yeah.
if they come back in.
I wonder if over time it came back up.
But also like obesity like wasn't like 50 to 100 years ago, it just wasn't a thing. Like it's just popped up pretty recently, and I think that's very due to like lifestyle and everything. Chance?
When you're thinking about these things, do you ever think about the movie Wall-E? Because like,
Yes, all the time. Yes. When they're like, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like, yeah, another 5 years, you know, we're gonna-
5 years? Wow, that's funny.
Why do we not care about New Jersey?
I don't know.
Why do we not care about New Jersey?
Maybe
Is it on the? Oh, it's on there.
they just reversed everything, I guess. I don't know.
New Jersey do.
They just said, no, we're good.
Yeah, I don't know.
Great Lakes are fascinated where the white is on this map.
Yeah.
And then you've got Lee County, Florida over here.
And I mean, like, obviously you can see, like, the South is just a
Oh, yeah.
big thing, but yeah, I don't know.
But that's the thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
So now that you brought up New Jersey, do you think that this has anything to do with the difference in data collection and how many people reported it? Because in 2004, you had, okay, show my age, like, internet was, people used it and things, but I think that, like, reporting capability mortality may have increased. Do you think that had anything to do with it?
Maybe a little, but again, I think it's just like that it increases over time. I don't think that's a huge factor.
Is it, well, that's what I was trying to read. I
Yeah,
can't
they're
see
both,
it.
they're both CDC reports, right?
Yeah.
So they don't get the choice to report.
There you go, yeah.
Well, I have a question about the math. Was it a slow progression? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
From 2004 to here, could you see that progression in those maps that you didn't include? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it was definitely more like, because that's just pretty, but
I would be curious what pharmaceutical companies. I don't think, big pharma would ever or anything that leads to.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. I would love to explore the big pharma.
I agree.
yeah, I think it's all like it's definitely all a business and all about money. Brady?
Do you know what, like, it says obesity percentage, like, and diagnosed diabetes percentage. Do you know what percentage it is?
I don't, because I definitely doubt it's 100% because,
Right.
I think the numbers are down here at the bottom. They're down there at the very bottom.
Less than
Tiny
7.1.
number. See 'em?
Okay, yeah, I see.
okay, yeah.
Greater than 10.5 or greater than 30.5.
Something's wrong there. I just don't think that.
Where they just don't give up your data. You know, I will say,
Sadly.
colorblind person, this is.
Well, I think we've only gravy.
Guys, do we have any more additional questions for Bo?
Picky.
All right. Guys, thank you so